The station's market was alive with noise, color, and movement. Alien merchants called out their prices in strange, musical voices. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, sizzling oil, and spices from 100 worlds. Bright lights blinked above the stalls, and holograms floated in the air, showing pictures of food, weapons, and clothing. Crowds pushed and shuffled, their many hands, claws, or tentacles waving to get the merchant's attention. In the middle of all this, a tiny figure stood very still. She was no taller than a human. Child of 8 years, her clothes were old, torn, and far too big for her thin body. Her skin was pale silver with faint blue lines that pulsed softly. Her large eyes, a deep violet color, looked at the crowd with a mix of hope and fear. Every time she tried to step forward, the people turned away. Some moved aside as if she carried a disease. Others muttered words in their own language, sharp, bitter words that made her flinch. The girl raised a hand toward a fruit stand. The merchant, a tall alien with 4 eyes, glared at her and pulled the basket back. "Not for your kind," he spat in a language most could understand. Her lips trembled, but she did not argue. She lowered her hand and stepped back, blending into the shadows from the far side of the market. A human man was walking slowly through the crowd. Captain Elias Kane had been on this station before. He had seen its busy market, its noisy traders, and its dangerous back alleys. But today, something caught his eye. It was a small figure standing alone. She was not selling anything, not buying, not even speaking. She was simply there, as if waiting for something that would never come. He noticed the way people avoided her. Not just ignored her, but avoided her. It was as if they feared being too close. Elias frowned, his hand brushing the old leather strap of the bag slung over his shoulder. He had seen this kind of behavior before. On Earth, during the worst of times, he had seen people shunned for nothing more than their name, their face, or the place they came from. The girl glanced toward him for the briefest second before looking away. Her violet eyes were striking, but they were filled with something heavy, something no child should carry. She moved to another stall, one selling small pieces of bread and meat. Her hand reached out again, and again the merchant's reaction was cold. The bread was pulled back. The merchant muttered something sharp, and the girl stepped away. Elias slowed his pace, watching. The crowd seemed to close around her whenever she moved, like the market itself was pushing her out. He noticed her small shoulders slump a little more each time she was rejected. Finally, she stopped trying. She stood near a wall, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes fixed on the ground. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were whispering something to herself. A shadow fell over her. It wasn't Elias, but a large alien male with thick armor plating on his body. He barked a word at her. Pointing toward the far end of the market, she nodded quickly and hurried away, disappearing into a narrow alley. Elias felt his jaw tighten. This wasn't just dislike, this was fear and hatred mixed together, and the girl was too small, too fragile to fight back. Elias thought of walking away. He had cargo to deliver and little time to waste. But his boots didn't turn toward the docking bay. Instead, he found himself following her at a distance. Not close enough to scare her, but near enough to see. Where she went, she moved quickly, weaving between stalls and crates until she reached a quieter corner of the station. There, behind a broken vending machine, she crouched down. From her pocket, she pulled out a small piece of something it looked like stale bread. She bit into it slowly, her eyes darting around like a hunted animal. For the first time, Elias noticed her hands were trembling. He stayed in the shadows, watching. Something in him, something buried deep, told him this wasn't right. The galaxy was full of cruelty, but here, in this small corner of it, he had a choice. He could walk away like everyone else, or he could take one step toward the girl that no one else dared to see. The market noise faded behind him as he took that step forward. The girl's head lifted slightly, sensing movement. Her violet eyes locked onto his for a heartbeat, and in that moment, Elias Kane knew his life was about to change. Elias kept his distance as the girl disappeared deeper into the stations. Quieter passages, the market's bright lights, and loud voices were far behind now, replaced by dim corridors and the hum of old machinery. He followed the faint sound of her footsteps, careful not to alert her. She moved like someone used to hiding, slipping between shadows and broken doors. Finally, she stopped beside a large metal crate and crouched down, nibbling at her stale bread. Elias stepped into view slowly, not wanting to scare her. She froze. Her violet eyes locked on him. He raised both hands in a calm gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. Her gaze flicked to the exit. Judging whether she could run, Elias didn't move closer. He simply set a small wrapped packet on the floor between them. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't reach for it. Before she could speak, a voice echoed down the corridor. "Human. Step away from her." Elias turned to see an old alien woman standing at the entrance to the passage, her skin a pale green with deep wrinkles. She was leaning on a metal staff, her eyes sharp and full of warning. "You don't know what you're doing," she said. Elias frowned. "She's just a kid." The woman shook her head. "She's Kailari." She whispered as if the word itself was dangerous. Elias had heard the name before. "Buried somewhere in the galaxy's long history," the old woman went on. "Her kind betrayed us all in the War of the Four Suns, centuries ago." Her voice carried a mix of anger and fear. "They sided with the enemy, and for that, the galaxy. We'll never forgive them." Elias glanced at the girl, who had lowered her head and pulled her knees to her chest. "She wasn't alive centuries ago," he said. The woman's voice hardened. "Doesn't matter. The blood is the same." Elias felt a cold weight in his chest. He had seen this before, on other worlds, on Earth too. Whole generations punished for something their ancestors had done. The truth didn't matter, only the story people chose to believe. The old woman turned and left, muttering words Elias couldn't catch. Her footsteps faded. Leaving a heavy silence behind, the girl didn't speak, but Elias noticed her hands were gripping the edges of her torn clothing tightly. He crouched a little so he wasn't towering over her. "What's your name?" he asked. She stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on the ground. Elias tried again. "I'm Elias." A long pause, then a small, barely audible voice said, "Lyra, Lyra," he repeated, letting the name sit in the air. "It's a good name." She didn't answer, but her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. He nodded toward the bread he had left. "It's for you." Her eyes flickered toward it. But she didn't move until he stepped back a few paces. Only then did she reach out. "Take it quickly. And hold it close like it might be stolen." Elias watched as she took a bite, her small teeth tearing into the soft crust. For the first time, he saw her expression shift, not quite a smile, but less guarded. "You live here? On the station?" he asked. She nodded once, still eating, alone. Another nod, slower this time. The corridor lights flickered, casting her thin figure in and out of shadow. Elias thought about what the old woman had said. It didn't make sense to him punishing a child for a war she had no part in, and yet, here it was, plain as day. He remembered the looks in the market, the way people pulled away from her. It was fear, mixed with hatred. A poison passed down through generations. "Do they all treat you like this?" he asked quietly. Lyra's chewing slowed, then stopped. She looked up at him for a moment, and in that moment, Elias saw the answer in her eyes. She didn't need to speak. He already knew. Every day, every hour, she carried that weight, a sound. From the far end of the corridor made them both look up. 3 alien youths stepped into view. their faces twisted with cruel amusement. One of them, a tall figure with ridged skin, sneered. Well, well. If it isn't the little Kailari Riatand, her human pet. Lyra shrank back instantly. But Elias stepped forward, placing himself between her and them. Keep walking, Elias said in a calm but firm voice. The leader laughed. Or what? Human. You'll protect her. That's a good way to end up dead. Elias didn't move. The standoff lasted only a few seconds before the youths muttered insults and walked away. When they were gone, Elias turned to Lyra. They'll be back, she said softly, her voice trembling. Then we'll be ready, he replied. Lyra's eyes widened at the word we. It was the first time anyone had included her in something without mockery. For a brief second, her lips twitched upward before she quickly looked away. It wasn't a full smile, not yet, but it was the beginning. Elias knew he couldn't undo centuries of hate. But maybe, just maybe, he could change one person's world. And he decided, right there in the dim light of that corridor, that he would try. The next morning, the market was just as noisy and crowded as before. Merchants shouted prices, smells of strange foods drifted through the air, and the sound of haggling echoed between stalls. But Elias wasn't here for supplies. He was here for her. He moved slowly through the crowd, scanning faces. He saw a dozen different alien species, tall and short, some with skin like metal, others with feathers, but no sign of Lyra. He began to wonder if she had found a new hiding place, or maybe she had been chased away from the station altogether. Then, near the corner where the bread sellers gathered, he spotted her. She was standing in the shadow of a metal pillar. Her head lowered, her hands were tucked into her sleeves, and she kept her back against the wall like she was ready to run at any moment. The moment she saw him, her eyes widened slightly. Her body tensed, but she didn't move. Elias approached, slowly weaving through the crowd. When he was a few steps away, he reached into the satchel on his shoulder. From it, he pulled a small loaf of warm bread wrapped in cloth. The smell was rich, and steam still curled from its surface. He crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. This is for you, he said gently. Her eyes darted from his face to the bread. Her expression didn't change, but Elias noticed her throat move as if she had swallowed. She didn't take it. Instead, she glanced toward the nearby merchants. They were pretending not to watch. But he could feel their cold eyes on them both. Elias sighed softly and set the bread on a crate beside her. Then he stood up, stepping back slowly. He didn't want her to feel trapped. She stayed frozen for a few moments, staring at the bread, like it might vanish. Then, when he took another step away, her hand darted out. She grabbed the bread, pulled it close to her chest, and looked at him with suspicion. He gave a small nod. You don't have to say anything, he said. Just eat. She blinked at him but didn't reply. Instead, she tore a small piece from the loaf and brought it to her mouth. Her teeth sank into it, and for a second, something in her expression softened. Elias stayed near but didn't push for conversation. He knew trust couldn't be forced, it had to be earned. While she ate, he pretended to browse the nearby stalls. Keeping her in the corner of his vision, a merchant tried to draw his attention to a pile of spices. But Elias only shook his head. His mind wasn't on trading. It was on the tiny figure leaning against the wall and quietly eating. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the edge of her sleeve. Her eyes flicked up at him once more. Elias smiled, not too big, not too eager. Just enough to let her know he was glad to see her eat. Something strange happened then. Her lips twitched upward for the briefest moment before she looked away. It wasn't a full smile, but it was there. Small, quick, and gone in a heartbeat. But real. That tiny flicker made Elias's chest feel warm. It was proof that maybe, just maybe, he could reach her. But the moment didn't last long. A voice rang out from the crowd, harsh and mocking. Well, if it isn't the human feeding the station rat? 3 alien youths from the day before were standing a few stalls away. Their eyes locked on Lyra, and one of them laughed. Careful, human. Feed her too much and she might start following you. Elias stepped slightly in front of her without thinking. Walk away, he said calmly. They smirked, muttered something in their language, and moved on. But Elias could feel Lyra's eyes on him. She looked confused, almost as if she couldn't understand why he would put himself between her and danger. When the market settled again, Elias turned back to her. They won't stop, she said quietly. He nodded. I know. Then why help me? Elias thought for a moment, then said simply, because someone should have helped you a long time ago. She stared at him, her violet eyes searching his face. For a moment, it looked like she might speak again, but instead, she turned and slipped into the crowd. Elias let her go, knowing that chasing her would only break the fragile trust they were building. As he made his way back to the docking bay, he couldn't shake the memory of that almost smile. It had been small, but in a galaxy full of cold eyes, it was the first sign of warmth he'd seen from her, and he was determined to see it again. By the 3rd day, Elias had gotten used to scanning the market for the small silver-skinned figure. Sometimes he spotted her quickly. Other times, she seemed to vanish like smoke. But that day, the moment he entered the market, he knew something was wrong. The usual noise of the crowd felt sharper, colder. Merchants gave him quick glances, whispering behind their hands. One even turned his stall's display screen off when Elias walked past. He could feel the weight of unfriendly eyes following him. It was like the market had decided he was no longer welcome. He found Lyra near the old bread stand, but this time she wasn't alone. 2 station guards in dark armor stood a few steps away, keeping her in their sight. Their hands rested on their stun batons. Lyra's head was down, her small body pressed against the wall like she wanted to melt into it. Elias's steps slowed as soon as the guards noticed him. One of them smirked. So you're the human who's been feeding the Kailari, he said in a low voice. Elias didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. The second guard shook his head. Station doesn't like troublemakers, and you're making trouble. Elias ignored them and walked past to stand near Lyra. You all right? He asked. She didn't look up, just gave the smallest nod. One guard stepped forward. You should walk away now, human, before the station authorities hear about this. Elias turned toward them, his voice calm. She's a kid. The guards' smirk widened. She's a Kailari. That single word carried so much poison, it made Elias's stomach twist. He knew there was no point in arguing with them, but walking away didn't feel like an option either. The guards eventually left, though not before throwing one last warning over their shoulders. Elias exhaled slowly and crouched beside Lyra. You're safe, he said quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper. Not for long. She was right. That afternoon, as Elias made his way back toward the docking bay, trouble found him. A group of alien men blocked the narrow walkway. They were larger than him, with ridged forearms and sharp teeth that showed when they grinned. One of them stepped forward. You've been making friends with the wrong kind of people. Elias kept his hands loose at his sides. Ready? If they moved closer, move, he said. The alien laughed. Or what? You'll fight all of us for her. Another stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Elias could feel the tension in the air tightening. The market noise behind him faded. No one was going to help. The first swing came fast. Elias ducked, his shoulders slamming into the nearest attacker. They stumbled, but the others closed in. Fists and claws swiped through the air. Elias blocked one, dodged another. But a heavy blow to his side made him grunt. He was outnumbered, and he knew it then, out of nowhere. A sharp cloud of sparkling dust burst into the air between them. The aliens coughed, their eyes watering. Elias blinked through the haze and Saw Lyra. She was holding a small pouch, the contents still spilling out. The dust shimmered as it floated, clinging to skin and armor, making the aliens stagger back. "This way?" she called, her voice sharper than he'd ever heard it. Elias didn't hesitate. He followed her through a twisting path of narrow alleys. They ran until the shouts behind them faded. Finally, they stopped in an abandoned storage bay, breathing hard. Elias leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "You saved me," he said between breaths. Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes serious. "They'll come for you now." "Because of me," she said quietly. Elias shook his head. "No. They'll come because they don't like what I'm doing, but I'm not stopping." For a moment, she just stared at him. Then, without warning, she turned away and sat on an old crate, pulling her knees to her chest. Elias could tell she was thinking. Weighing something, she didn't say another word. But he noticed she didn't run from him either. That was enough for now. Outside, the station lights dimmed slightly as the artificial night cycle began. But Elias knew the darkness here wasn't in the sky, was in the way people looked at her, and now, in the way they looked at him, still, as he glanced at the small figure sitting a few feet away. He felt no regret. If this was trouble, it was the kind worth having. The storage bay was quiet except for the faint hum of the station's life support systems. Dim yellow lights flickered above, casting soft shadows over the dusty floor. Elias sat on a crate across from Lyra, who was curled up on her own seat. Knees pulled tight to her chest, she kept her eyes on the ground, her fingers lightly tapping the metal surface as if counting an invisible rhythm. For a while, neither of them spoke. Elias knew better than to push her too soon. Trust was like glass once cracked. It could never be the same. Instead, he opened the satchel on his side and pulled out a small metal flask. He took a sip, then set it down on the crate between them. "It's just water," he said softly. Lyra glanced at it, but didn't move. Minutes passed before she finally shifted. Her small hand reached forward. Hesitating before taking the flask, she drank slowly. Her eyes never meeting his when she handed it back. Elias said, "You saved me earlier." She shrugged. "Didn't want them to hurt you." He gave her a faint smile. "Still, you didn't have to." There was silence again. Then, unexpectedly, Lyra spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "My name is Lyra Kale." Elias repeated it softly. "Lyra Kale." Sounds strong. Her lips twitched at the comment, but she didn't smile. After another pause, she added, "I was born here. On this station." Elias tilted his head. "Born here, not on a Kylar homeworld." Her eyes dropped again, and she shook her head. "There is no homeworld anymore," she said. The words were flat, but the weight in them was heavy. "My parents. They were the last of my family," she continued. "They worked in the lower decks, repairing machines. No one else wanted to touch." She drew a slow breath, her hands tightening around her knees. "One day, they didn't come back." Elias didn't interrupt. "They told me it was an accident. But I heard the guards talking," she said bitterly. "They said it wasn't worth helping Kylari workers when something went wrong." Elias felt his chest tighten. It was the kind of cruelty that didn't make headlines small. Deliberate neglect that killed without firing a shot, and after that? He asked gently. "I stayed in the shadows," she replied, stealing scraps. Hiding where the guards wouldn't go, her voice grew quieter. "No one talks to me, except to say I should disappear." She finally lifted her gaze to meet her violet eyes looked older than they should, holding years of loneliness. "Do you know what it's like," she asked, "to have people look at you like you're already dead?" Elias didn't answer right away. He thought of his own past of battles fought, of people turning away when they learned what he'd done in the war. "Yes," he said simply. "I know." Something in her expression softened, just slightly. She studied him for a moment longer before looking away again. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why are you helping me?" Elias leaned back, thinking, "I've seen too many people walk past when they could have helped." He said, "I don't want to be one of them." She didn't reply, but her shoulders dropped a little. That small change told him more than words could. She was letting him in just a little, but enough, from his satchel. Elias pulled out a small, foil-wrapped package. Inside was a slice of soft, sweet bread he'd bought earlier. He placed it between them without a word. Lyra's eyes locked on it. After a moment, she reached out and took it, tearing off a piece. She ate slowly, as if savoring not just the taste, but the act of someone giving it to her freely. As she finished, the faintest ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was gone in an instant, but Elias noticed he didn't point it out, he just stored it away. In his mind, the station's distant speakers crackled with the voice of an announcer, warning that the market would close in 1 hour. Elias stood and adjusted the strap of his satchel. "I'll walk you to wherever you sleep," he said. Lyra frowned. "You don't have to. I want to." He replied simply. She hesitated before nodding together. They stepped out into the dim corridor. The sounds of the market were faint now, replaced by the soft hum of power conduits and the distant clang of maintenance tools. As they walked, Elias noticed she stayed close, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel safer. When they reached a narrow maintenance hatch, she stopped. "This is where I go," she said quietly. Elias glanced at the small gap in the wall, barely wide enough for a child. It led to the station's ventilation maze. "You sleep there?" he asked. She gave a tiny nod. Elias clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to tell her it wasn't safe. Instead, he crouched to meet her eyes. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then, very faintly, she whispered, "Okay," before disappearing into the shadows. Elias stood there for a long time after she was gone. He knew her story now, and knowing it made him even more certain he wasn't going to let the galaxy break her any more than it already had. The next morning, the station's artificial lights had barely brightened when Elias stepped into the market. The air was thick with the usual smells, spices, fried food, and engine oil, but something felt different. It was quieter near the entrance, and the moment Elias walked in, conversations seemed to stop for a few seconds. He could feel the eyes on him, not curious, not friendly, watchful. Cold and calculating, he spotted Lyra near the back, standing by the same bread stall where he had first given her food. She wasn't looking at the merchant. Her eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for him. When she saw him, her shoulders eased just a little. But before he could reach her, two station guards stepped into his path. They wore dark armor, polished and intimidating. One of them, a tall figure with scaled skin, spoke first. Captain Elias Kane. His voice was deep and flat. "You're under arrest for harboring an unwanted species." Elias raised his eyebrows. "Harboring?" "I gave her bread." "That's enough," the guard said. "You will come with us." Elias glanced past them, trying to catch Lyra's eye, but another guard had moved in behind her, keeping her from running. Her hands were clenched into fists, and her lips were pressed tight. She looked small, smaller than ever. They took Elias through the crowded market. People stepped aside, some with satisfaction on their faces. Others whispered behind their hands by the time they reached the station's security block. Elias could already feel the tension building in his chest. They shoved him into a narrow cell with metal walls and a single flickering light. The door slammed shut, and the sound echoed like a final warning. He paced for a while, trying to think of a plan. No charges had been officially read, but he knew how things worked here. They could hold him for as long as they wanted without explanation. Across the station, in another part of the security block, Lyra was locked in a small holding room. No bed, no chair, just cold metal and a vent in the wall. She sat on the floor. Hugging her knees, she had been in places like this before. But it felt worse now, because this time, someone had been taken away for helping her. Hours passed before the cell door slid open. A guard stepped in, holding a small data pad. "You've been charged with disruption of public order," he said to Elias. The fine was absurd, more than Elias made in a month, and if he couldn't pay, the alternative was months of labor in the station's lower levels. Elias leaned back against the wall. "So that's what this is about, money." The guard's expression didn't change. "Or you can sign a statement promising to have no further contact with the Kailari." Elias didn't answer. His silence was enough to make the guard smirk before leaving the cell. Meanwhile, word had begun to spread quietly among some of the station's workers. A few had seen Elias's kindness. A dock mechanic whispered the story to a food vendor. The vendor told a courier. By the end of the cycle, a small group had formed a handful of people willing to speak up that night as the guards prepared to move Elias to a long-term holding area. The lights in the security block flickered. An alarm blared in the distance. The guards cursed, distracted by the commotion. Elias felt a sharp tug at his arm. When he looked down, he saw a familiar pair of violet eyes. Lyra, somehow out of her cell, pulling at his sleeve. "This way," she whispered urgently. He didn't ask how she had gotten free. He just followed. They slipped through an access door into a service corridor. The hum of machinery filled the narrow space, and steam hissed from overhead pipes behind them. Distant shouts echoed as the guards realized their prisoners were gone. Lyra led him through a maze of maintenance tunnels. At one point, Elias had to crawl through a tight passage, the metal cold against his hands. When they finally emerged into an abandoned docking bay, Elias exhaled in relief. The space smelled of rust and old fuel. In the center was his freighter, quietly waiting in the shadows. He turned to her. "How did you?" She shook her head. "Some people helped, but only because you helped me first." Elias studied her for a moment. She was breathing hard, her hands trembling, but her eyes were steady. She had risked everything to come back for him. They boarded the freighter as the engines hummed to life. Elias looked out at the empty docking bay. "This means we can't come back here," Key said. "I know," she replied, her voice low, "but I'd rather leave with you than stay here alone." He glanced at her, seeing the truth in her words. This wasn't just about escaping. This was about choosing a future. As the freighter lifted off, the station grew smaller behind them. The price of kindness had been high, but Elias knew, without a doubt, it had been worth paying. The freighter drifted quietly in open space, far from the station's watchful eyes. Beyond the viewport, stars stretched in endless patterns, each one cold and distant, inside the small ship. The hum of the engines was steady, almost calming. Elias sat in the pilot's chair, hands resting loosely on the controls. Beside him, in the co-pilot's seat, Lyra sat with her legs pulled up, staring out at the stars. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was the kind of quiet that comes when two people know there's nothing they need to say right away. Finally, Elias broke it. "You ever been off the station before?" Lyra shook her head, her violet eyes still fixed on the dark expanse beyond the glass. "Never," she said softly. Her voice carried a strange mix of wonder and sadness. Elias reached over to a control panel and tapped a few buttons. The ship's auto-navigation engaged, and the freighter began to adjust its course toward a small, uninhabited moon. "Thought you might like to see something better than rusted metal walls," he said. She glanced at him briefly, unsure whether to believe him in the ship's small galley. Elias opened a storage compartment and pulled out a package. Inside was food, not stale scraps, not ration bars, but fresh, soft bread and a packet of preserved fruit. When he set it on the table, Lyra's eyes followed every movement. "Go ahead," he told her. She hesitated, as if expecting him to change his mind. When he didn't, she reached out slowly, taking a piece of bread and holding it in her hands like it was something fragile. As she ate, Elias noticed she didn't rush. She took small bites, savoring each one. For someone who had gone hungry so often, this wasn't just a meal, it was a rare gift. When she finished, she wiped her fingers on a cloth and looked at him. "You keep giving me things," she said quietly. Elias smiled faintly. "They're not things, Leary, they're just what you should have had all along." For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she asked the question he had known was coming. "What happens now?" Elias leaned back in his seat, thinking, "That's up to you," he said. "You can stay with me as long as you want, or I can take you somewhere safe. Somewhere no one cares about the Kylar." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in thought. "Somewhere safe doesn't sound real," she said. Elias chuckled softly. "It's real enough, just rare." The freighter dropped out of hyperspace near the moon. Its surface was covered in pale blue ice. Reflecting the light of a nearby star, Elias brought the ship down slowly, landing on a flat stretch near a frozen lake. When the ramp lowered, a rush of cold, crisp air swept inside. Lyra hesitated at the top of the ramp. "You're not going to leave me here, are you?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Elias shook his head. "Not unless you tell me to." They stepped out together, their boots crunching against the ice. The air was still. The only sound, the faint crackle of the frozen lake beneath them. Lyra walked slowly, her eyes scanning the horizon. It was the first time in her life she had seen a place untouched by walls, guards, or crowds. She knelt down and touched the ice with her fingers, watching frost gather on her skin. Elias stood a few steps away, watching her quietly. There was something different in the way she moved, less cautious, more curious, when she turned back toward him. He saw it, a smile, small at first, then growing until it lit up her whole face. It wasn't forced, and it wasn't fleeting. It was pure, open, and unguarded. "You're smiling," Elias said. A little surprised, Lyra tilted her head. "You sound like you've been waiting for that." "I have," he admitted. She laughed, a soft, almost shy sound, but it carried more warmth than anything he had heard from her before. They stayed on the ice until the pale star began to dip lower in the sky. Back aboard the ship, Lyra settled into the co-pilot's seat again, but this time, she wasn't curled up tightly. Her posture was relaxed, her hands resting loosely in her lap. She turned to Elias. "You didn't have to do all this for me." He glanced at her. No. Then why?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the stars and said, "Because I wanted you to know there's more to life than what they told you you deserved." Lyra's smile returned, softer now, but no less real. And in that moment, Elias realized something. The galaxy could keep its cold eyes, its old hatreds, its poisoned stories out here. In the quiet between the stars, one small smile had already changed everything.